Hey family, thanks for clicking on this video. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's beneficial to you. I want to thank you, everyone who's our Patreon supporters, for all your support throughout the months. It's so wonderful and encouraging to us. It is a part of how we are able to do what we do. Many of you already know that unless you support what you love, it goes away. This is not something that makes you, wealthy. So if you guys want to see more content, if you guys want to keep seeing the content you're already seeing from Kingdom in Context, please consider the PayPal or Patreon links below. We even have a P.O. box if you don't want to do modern forms of that and you just want to donate through the mail. A lot of people have donated through the mail to us and written us beautiful letters. We really appreciate it. But yeah, please check that out. That's how we keep going. That's how we actually are able to keep providing this content for you. And so those of you who already have, we love you, we appreciate you. Those of you who haven't, we love you and appreciate you. That's our goal, is that you can understand the scriptures and go out and share it with the world and keep the kingdom in context. It's a beautiful message that we've been given by our Creator through His Word. So thank you everybody again, and I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time. Shabbat Shalom. Hello, welcome to Kingdom Portions. I'm Sean Griffin. It's my lovely wife.
Shabbat Shalom, guys. I'm Lindsay.
And this week we're still in Deuteronomy.
Yep.
Right? And we're going to pick back up, I think, in chapter 21. Mm-hmm. We're going to go all the way to chapter 25. And I'm excited about this one, sweetie, because there's lots of things to talk about in Deuteronomy. It goes over a lot of topics really fast within each chapter, but we're going to highlight two big topics that this one covers that I think is going to really be exciting for a lot of people. It's going to bless other people, hopefully provide clarity to everybody watching. So, because not only are we going to discuss some controversial phrasings about forbidden relationships, but also we're going to address the 144,000.
It's pretty revelatory. I mean, for me personally, in the study we did for it, some things came out that I didn't really know before. So
yeah, I'm excited. I really am. So, okay. Thanks for joining us, guys. First time to see us, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. That way you're notified when new videos come out. And that way you'll see us next week when we release Kingdom Portions next week. Okay? Thanks for joining us. So, do you want to start off reading Deuteronomy?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to pick up in Deuteronomy 21, verse 10, if you're following along.
All right. Chapter 21, verse 10. When you go out to battle your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take them away captive, and see among the captives a beautiful woman, and have a desire for her, and would take her as a wife for yourself, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She shall also remove the clothes of her captivity, and shall remain in your house, and mourn her father and mother a full month. And after that you may go in to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. It shall be, if you are not pleased with her, then you shall let her go wherever she wishes, but you shall certainly not sell her for money. You shall not mistreat her, because you have humbled her. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then it shall be in the day he wills what he has to his sons. He cannot make the son of the He cannot make the son of the loved the firstborn before the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of his strength. To him belongs the right of the firstborn. If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son, who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him, and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it in fear. If a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day, for he who is hanged is accursed of God, so that you do not defile your land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance.
All right. So, first thing that pops out to you.
Well, I do find it interesting that we have some details about stoning a son.
Yes.
And these details would indicate that this is not a child. We hear a lot of people who unbelievers, atheists, people who don't like the Bible will talk about the commands to stone your children. But I would say that calling this particular son rebellious and specifically, a drunkard.
That's right.
That would probably imply that it's not a child.
Called him a glutton and a drunkard.
Yes.
Okay. Not normally terms you would give to a child.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe glutton, but...
Well, even then, that's... So, to me, this reminds me of... those two descriptions, a glutton and a drunkard, those are descriptions of patterns of behavior that you observe over a period of time. Yeah. So this isn't just a rebellious 12-year-old who doesn't want to obey his parents, okay? We're talking about ingrained habits. And in my opinion, it's hard to be a glutton if your parents are the one mediating your food, right? If they're portioning out your food for you, then how are you can't, unless you're just literally stealing food from the cupboard at night, so the point is, the context seems to easily tell us that this is talking about a grown man. Now, obviously, even grown men still have relationships with their father and mother, right? Want to still take counsel from their father and mother. And that's where they're bringing them to the elders. They determine that this guy, is obstinately going against what his father and mother are saying. Now, what I would say is the previous context that we have from Deuteronomy 13,
right,
and pretty much all of the Torah, would suggest that the elders and the parents are judging this guy by the standard of the Torah, right? So therefore, this, could go into a whole other video about drinking, but we'll leave that for there. But the point is, I think it's interesting, though, that not only is it kind of hinting that this is not just a child, this is a grown man, and that's what Lindsay and I both agree upon, but also the fact that if they're going to bring him to the elders to evaluate him, this isn't a process by which they're just saying this guy isn't obeying us, right? This is something they can observe as a long-term pattern of behavior. And then, of course, most other things in the Torah that result in death means you're going against these instructions for life. You're going against what's good for not just yourself, but your relationship with God and also with the entire community. So it seems to me that there's a lot more destructive behavior being observed in this scenario than just a wayward 9-year-old. Right, who's acting like throwing a temper tantrum, right, because he didn't get, a little honey stick or whatever. I don't know. I mean, for those of you with children, you know what I'm saying, right? You'd be upset with them, but you're never going to call them a drunkard or a glutton.
Well, and the other thing is that we have to remember that this word rebellious, it's kind of lost its real biblical meaning for us in our, modern society. You just think rebelling against your parents, is just saying no when they tell you to do something. But in the context of the Torah, rebellious would imply following other gods, involving yourself in divination and witchcraft. And we know it says rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. So, we have these other definitions of rebellion in the Torah that would imply there's something more serious going on than just, dad told you to, go scoop the poop from the dogs in the yard and you said no. That's not what rebellion is talking about.
And even more to that point, what happens if the parents come before the elders and the parents say, he's not obeying us? Right. You know what I'm saying? We need to bring him before you, and the elders say, well, what are you asking him to do? Yeah. And they're like, oh, we want him to go sacrifice to Molech, and he's not doing it. Well, of course, the elders of the city, who are supposed to be trained in Torah and the instructions of living, right? And they're supposed to be able to evaluate. That's the standard by which they judge. So, of course, they're not going to look at the parents in that case and say, oh, well, then, we need to enforce Torah from your request for him not to obey Torah. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, Torah is the guideline for all this, guys. And, a child is under the authority of his parents while he's in his house. This is talking about a grown man. Yeah. Okay, so, all right. I can start off with chapter 22. Okay. And let's see here. So we got chapter 22, and it talks. All right, chapter 22. You shall not see your countryman's ox or his sheep straying away, and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly bring them back to your countryman. If your countryman is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall remain with you until your countryman looks for it. Then you shall restore it to him. Thus you shall do with his donkey, and you shall do the same with his garment. You shall do likewise with anything lost by your countryman, which he has lost and you have found. You are not allowed to neglect them. You shall not see your countryman's donkey or his ox fallen down on the way, and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly help him to raise them up. A woman shall not wear men's clothing, nor shall a man put on a woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. If you happen to come upon a bird's nest along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young one or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall certainly let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, in order that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you will not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone falls from it. You shall not sow your vineyard with 2 kinds of seed, or all the produce of seed which you have sown, and the increase of the vineyard will become defiled. You shall not plant with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a material mixed of wool and linen together. You shall make for yourselves tassels on the 4 corners of your garment with which you cover yourself. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and then turns against her, and charges her with shameful deeds and publicly defames her, and says, I took this woman, but when I came near her, I did not find her a virgin, then the girl's father and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of the girl's virginity to the elders of the gate at the city. The girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man for a wife, but he turned against her, and behold, he's charged her with shameful deeds, saying, I did not find your daughter a virgin. But this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. So the elders of that city shall take the man and chastise him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give it to the girl's father, because he publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. And she shall remain his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. But if this charge is true, that the girl was not found a virgin, then they shall bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death, because she has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. If a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. If there is a girl who is a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city. You shall stone them to the death, the girl because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. But if in the field the man finds the girl who is engaged, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl. There is no sin in the girl worthy of death. For just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. When he found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. If a man finds a girl who is a virgin, who is not engaged, and seizes her, and lies with her, and they are discovered, then the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 shekels of silver. And she shall become his wife, because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, so that he will not uncover his father's skirt. All right. So there's a lot in that chapter. Like I said at the beginning of this one, Deuteronomy is notorious for this, right? Within each chapter, there's a whole bunch of different topics it covers.
It's a trail mix.
Yes, there's a lot going on in there. We know the Torah is encoded, so it could be why that sometimes seemingly unrelated topics are put next to each other. But there's a few topics in here that are very much related, that are kind of butted next to each other. Mm-hmm. So what sticks out to you, sweetie?
I did notice that there are 2 fabrics that are specified in there, and that's wool and linen.
Right.
So we're not to mix wool and linen. So that just is something that people should take note of, because, a lot of times when someone finds out you keep the commandments, they might say to you, aside from other things, well, are you wearing mixed threads? Are you wearing mixed fabrics? Well, most of us probably are, and guess what? The commandment is not specifically against any mixed fabrics. The commandment is specifically against mixing wool and linen. Right. So that's something that's definitely worthy of note for people.
Two very specific materials.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also, along the lines of planting 2 kinds of seed in the same hole. We know that there are literal applications to many of the commandments, and then there's also spiritual applications. And a lot of people, when we talk about this verse, a lot of us are usually talking about the Nephilim. A lot of us are usually referring to this verse when we refer to, the mixing of angels and humans and that whole fiasco.
Oh, so you mean like genetically mixing seeds?
Yes,
okay.
yeah. Okay. Genetically mixing seeds. So that could definitely be a literal application. But a spiritual application that I've always kind of seen in that verse is the mixing of good doctrine with bad doctrine. The mixing of clean and unclean when it comes to your doctrine. So a lot of us, we went to church and there's there's some good stuff in the churches. I mean, they teach some of these basic things that we need Jesus, he's our Savior. They do teach that he's our high priest, whether or not it's really taught what that means is debatable. But you have some other bad doctrine thrown in there, like not keeping the commandments, or certain commandments, changing the Sabbath day, pagan holidays, things like that. So to me, that would be a spiritual application of this particular commandment. And there probably aren't a whole lot of us that are planting fields and that are farmers and stuff, but we can definitely apply the spiritual aspect of that as far as what kind of doctrine we're taking in on a regular basis.
Absolutely, because all the Torah that we're reading about and all the different instructions for different facets of life, both for physical activity and for mental and spiritual activity, all this is going to be followed in the New Jerusalem, right? All this is the guidelines. This is going to be the how we behave, right? So not only do we have a spiritual application, because in the New Jerusalem there will only be one doctrine.
Yes, the
right?
Torah will go forth from Zion.
Right, Isaiah 2:2-5. There is no question about what our Messiah, who is the embodiment of Torah, and who walked it out perfectly, who will, he'll teach it to the nations, and we will be part of that royal priesthood that teaches it to all the survivors outside the city. So that's literally going to be the only doctrine. There'll be no mixing of doctrines. And as for little practical application of this particular passage, as we plant crops inside the New Jerusalem and 1,500 square miles of land, we won't be mixing seeds.
Right.
Right. So there'll actually be a practical application for this in the kingdom as well, which I think is pretty beautiful. Metaphorically, there's also the application as Jesus talks to the Pharisees in John chapter 8, talking about, you're not of your father Abraham because you do the deeds of the devil. Yeah. So there's a couple other passages in Scripture, and I would actually contend that it goes all the way back to Genesis 3:15, where it actually talks about how when you're doing the seeds of the woman, it's not referring to Eve in that passage specifically because it's talking about the New Jerusalem. And that's where the seeds of righteousness, or those who are born of God, were born of God through our, through the Spirit, and that's why Paul can reference the New Jerusalem to come as Mother Jerusalem. Right. And then there's other passages in the New Testament where it talks about, if you're, I think it's in Romans chapter 8, but it talks about, being of the seed of righteousness, you're doing the works of righteousness.
Right.
So, there's definitely an application of keeping your seeds separated,
Yeah, I mean, if you sow righteousness, you reap life.
That's right.
If you sow sin, you reap death.
That's right.
So we do have that other metaphorical application there.
Absolutely. Other than that, there's a lot in here that we may not get into just because there's so much different concepts, but there's also the uniqueness of, the adultery laws, right? There's some in here about, if the woman cries out, if she doesn't cry out, that can impose, could be considered consent. But then, of course, also it looks like sex before marriage, right? If the guy goes with the virgin and then he has to marry her, right? You can't divorce her. And that's, of course, if she consented and didn't cry out.
Right.
So then it's a different story, right?
I want to point out what it does not say, which is something that I used to say when I was, an unbeliever and I didn't like the Bible, and I would, try to tell people why it was a bad book. I would talk about basically that the Bible commands that a woman has to marry her rapist. And that's, you'll hear all kinds of atheists everywhere say the Bible commands that a woman, if she's raped, she has to marry the man who rapes her. And that is not in this passage. That's not in the text. There's a penalty for a rapist. He doesn't get to marry the woman. And the English translations might lend themselves to that terrible argument because it talks about, if he finds a woman and he seizes her. But I don't think it's talking about, against her will, because it specifies whether she cries out or doesn't cry out. So if she doesn't cry out, she's not being raped, she's consenting. So I just want to point out another bad argument from our lovely friends, the atheists, which I used to be one and not anymore, praise God. Yeah,
that's right. And of course we have the famous story of Dinah in Genesis, right? Where one of the Shechemite guys took Dinah. It doesn't specifically say whether she cried out or against her will or not, but the point I want to draw is that Jacob had taught all of his sons Torah, because we have lots of evidence that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kept Torah so faithfully. This is why they're referenced as the fathers all the time, and why they're constantly being said that these guys kept the commandments, and the same ones were given to everyone at Mount Sinai in the same covenant that was given to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob was considered a very righteous man who was to teach his sons the ways of righteousness, which would be the ways of Torah. And in that story, even though Jacob doesn't like how his boys go handle that,
right,
they're not condemned for that. In
right.
fact, they felt justified in going and killing that guy because of what he did to Dinah with that before they were married.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me, not just because of her age, but because that almost like there was a common consensus there that Dinah didn't want that.
Well, and I think there's quite a bit more of a backstory to that in Jubilees, isn't there? Where
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it talks about Levi actually being rewarded by the father for what he did in Shechem
Mm-hmm.
with the covenant of the priesthood. So it seems like there was a bit more going on legally with this relationship between Dinah and that man, and there were agreements that were made
Yes.
between the Shechemites. Is that what they're called?
Shechemites, yeah.
The
There was
Shechemites and Israel. And they didn't follow through with their
Jacob's
end of it?
boys wanted them to get circumcised if they were going to be in family with them
Okay.
through marrying Dinah, and that was the first rule, was if you want to be a part of us, you got to get circumcised. But we have the strict command that the Canaanites could not be a part of them at all. They were not supposed to intermarry with the Canaanites. So this was actually just a plot to set them up, so that after they were circumcised, all the men of that town were circumcised, and during that 3-day healing process. And if you go ahead on your own time and look up circumcision, so there's a healing process involved where a man may not be as mobile as he was before the surgery, so because of the sensitive area of the surgery, and that's when the boys of Jacob came in and killed all the men of Shechem, but they attributed it to defaming Dinah.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
that was kind of their initial motivation,
Yeah.
was how they treated their younger sister, who apparently was around the age of 12.
Yeah.
So how they treated their younger sister was the whole motivation for them to do this. Jacob was afraid of any backlash in the region that may come from it, but Jubilees and even in Genesis, they're not punished.
Right.
In fact, they're almost commended for it. So
Yeah.
just something to consider, that they're actually following Torah.
Right.
So no, a girl does not have to marry her rapist.
No.
That is a out of context lie from people who haven't read the Bible. Okay, so all right. Anyway, so would you like to pick up in 23?
I can do that.
Okay, so guys, we're going to start reading chapter 23 now.
All right. Chapter 23. No one who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. No one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall enter the assembly of the Lord. No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse you. Nevertheless, the Lord your God was not willing to listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You shall never seek their peace or their prosperity all your days. You shall not detest an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not detest an Egyptian, because you were an alien in his land. The sons of the 3rd generation who are born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. When you go out as an army against your enemies, you shall keep yourself from every evil thing. If there is among you any man who is unclean because of a nocturnal emission, then he must go outside the camp. He may not re-enter the camp. But it shall be, when evening approaches, he shall bathe himself with water, and at sundown he may re-enter the camp. You shall also have a place outside the camp, and go out there, and you shall have a spade among your tools, and it shall be, when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it, and shall turn to cover up your excrement. Since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to defeat your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be holy. And he must not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. You shall not hand over to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall live with you in your midst, in the place which he shall choose, in one of your towns where it pleases him. You shall not mistreat him. None of the daughters of Israel shall be a cult prostitute, nor shall any of the sons of Israel be a cult prostitute. You shall not bring the hire of a harlot or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord your God for any votive offering, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. You shall not charge interest to your countrymen, interest on money, food, or anything that may be loaned at interest. You may charge interest to a foreigner, but to your countrymen you shall not charge interest, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake in the land which you are about to enter to possess. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for it would be sin in you, and the Lord your God will surely require it of you. However, if you refrain from vowing, it would not be sin in you. You shall be careful to perform what goes out of your lips, just as you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, then you may eat grapes until you are fully satisfied, but you shall not put any in your basket. When you enter your neighbor's standing grain, then you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not wield a sickle in your neighbor's standing grain.
Okay, just like the last chapter, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
All right, so we're only going to address a couple of points in there, but we think this particular chapter has two really large points right at the beginning. Before we get into verse 2, I just want to point out real quick in verse 1 when it talks about the eunuchs. We also have back in Exodus the same concept about how nothing impure or deformed can come towards the tabernacle, the assembly. And this is specifically not just the entire encampment, but this is the actual place where they're doing the sacrifices, where Levites are.
Right. What we're defining for you right now is this word assembly, the assembly of the Lord, because that language, a lot of people hear that these certain groups of people cannot enter the assembly of the Lord to a certain generation. A lot of people think that means the nation of Israel itself, which would mean you can't come into covenant with Yahweh if you're of these certain lineages or these certain kinds of
That's not what it's saying. No, it's not at all what it's saying. What it's talking about is just the specific area, the inner camp, which would have been the place where the tabernacle was, where the Spirit of God would have descended, purity and the power of God. And there's a reason for that. Not only is it foreshadow to the future, what's going to happen in the kingdom of God, how everything will be healed. Right? So there will be no impurities, there will be no deformities or birth defects or anything like that. But also will be no eunuchs. So this is the idea why it mentions in verse 1 how, in addition to things that are genetically messed up at birth, eunuchs cannot go to that inner assembly, to the temple either. Now, the one thing I wanted to address real quick was this fact that many people have claimed that a eunuch cannot, they say, well, if they're excluded from the camp, then how are they going to go and make atonement? Right? But if you're a eunuch, then you're not head of household. Okay, because that means you have not been able to procreate to create your own household. Okay, so as a male eunuch, that means you're still going to be under the authority of your father. And if your father's already passed on, you're still under the authority of the priests and the high priests for when they make atonement for all of Israel, both intentional and unintentional sins. Okay, so it's not like he's excluded from actually being able to go and properly worship, which is to bring sacrifice or to have someone sacrifice something on his behalf to create atonement for him and mediate for him on his behalf. The Torah includes everybody. It's got all these backups, right? All these what I would call, secondary cases that it basically helps all the specific situations like this, and the eunuch would easily be included in all those. So this is not, a contradiction in the Torah at all. He's already covered. It's just explained in different areas. But we're actually going to talk about eunuchs later in relationship to the 144,000 towards the end of the video with some of our pairings. So stay tuned for that. But as for you, baby, did you want to talk about verse 2?
Yes. So we have this interesting order of verses here. We have, the eunuchs are mentioned in verse 1, but then we have verse 2 and 3, no one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord. And then it says even to that 10th generation. And then right after that, we have the Ammonites and the Moabites mentioned. So no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. And same with them, up to their 10th generation. So I think how I stumbled upon this is I was reading in a different translation when we were doing this study, and my translation had a little note at the bottom next to this little phrase, illegitimate birth. And so I followed that little note, and it led me to the actual Hebrew word used in this passage is mamzer. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Yeah. That's the something transliteration like on the concordance. But so this word mamzer, it doesn't just mean illegitimate birth as in, child of adultery or people who weren't married before, born out of wedlock. A lot of people have applied this verse to mean being born out of wedlock. That word literally means if you're from an incestuous relationship. So it makes perfect sense then that we have the Ammonites and the Moabites mentioned right after this. Because as we all know, they are the product of an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughters. And so that was just something that for me was totally revelatory. And I think I'm kind of confused as to why I looked at all the translations, and pretty much every translation has some form of, illegitimate birth, forbidden relationships, but that could mean a lot of different things. And we see that, bastard children, children born out of wedlock. I was born out of wedlock. Have long been treated like they can't be part of the family of God because of their birth.
So, as we just talked about in verse 1, we have what this argument you're talking about, what some people would claim is something that God is unfair about, right? Or they'll be worried that maybe they're not going to be included as not just the assembly, but all of Israel, meaning salvation itself. So, here's where we just want to clarify. Verse 1, what did we just discuss about those with the genetic impurities, deformities, or the eunuchs could not come to the assembly, the inner assembly. This isn't the entire camp, right? Because otherwise, we would never have the idea of a eunuch anyway. They would have been excluded from Israel. So
and we already have a video about what the camp is, right?
We talk about in one of my Morning Cup of Context videos. I talk about women on their menstruation period and were they excluded from the camp altogether, or was it again just talking about the tabernacle area? And then I break down the Hebrew in that, and it shows you it's just talking about the tabernacle. I'm going to put that up here on the screen. I'll put the link into that video in the description if you'd like to go watch that. Just another easy rebuttal to people who try to claim that God is so harsh and unloving when they actually haven't read the book. So this whole idea here is we've defined that the assembly is what we're talking about, not the entire encampment, not the community of people, but the assembly where the Levites were, the presence of God would have descended. So therefore, that's the first context foundation when we read verse 2, and it talks about anyone born from incestuous relationship, Ammonites or Moabites, up to the 10th generation can't come to the assembly. Right? So it's not talking about being in the entirety of Israel.
Right.
And there's a time qualifier.
Yeah.
The 10th generation. Okay.
Yeah, apparently whatever genetic things go wrong with that, it's like weeded out of the gene pool by the 10th generation. I'm assuming that's what that means.
He knows. Father knows. And so the point is, when Deuteronomy was written, so this is at the end of the 40 years that the children of Israel were in the wilderness doing their wanderings. They were about to cross to Jericho. They were about to go into the land of promise. They're about to cross the Jordan River to go up to the city of Jericho. And Moses hasn't quite died yet. So I'm just giving you some idea of the timeline of where Deuteronomy was written. And with that, he's kind of recapping some things for them. And, if you do the numbers and trace back to when the Ammonites and the Moabites began, right after Sodom and Gomorrah, with the fiasco with Lot and his daughters, then you would see that it's well within the 10 generations, no matter how you count your generations, whether you count a generation 50 years, 70 years, 80 years, or 100 years, or whatever, it's within that, because it was only 400 and something years that we're reading here up into, from Deuteronomy to the days of Lot. So I just want to encourage everyone that soon after Deuteronomy, an Ammonite or a Moabite could have came to the temple tabernacle area. Done so, basically up into the days of Judges, really.
Yeah.
So this was a very contextually, this was a time-specific commandment, a qualifier. And this is not talking about being in faith and in salvation, participating in the resurrection. It's not talking about whether you get to go to New Jerusalem or not upon the resurrection. This was a time-specific context to this discussion. And, like you so lovingly discovered and pointed out, it's talking about incestuous relationships, which is why the context mentions the Moabites and the Ammonites. All right. So I just hope that brings clarity to anyone out there that may be struggling with this, as I guess at some point you did.
Well, I mean, I had, I had heard, pretty much my whole life about this, being born out of wedlock thing and how serious that was.
Right.
And, and I always thought a person doesn't have any control over how they were conceived and born into this world. So how could that possibly be something that would, bar you from being in the family of God? But that's also the other thing, I never really took the time to study what it means to be in the assembly of the Lord. And so, in the English reading of that, you would just naturally, think that just means part of Israel, part of his family.
So God's inclusive.
Yeah.
He really is. He wants, what does he tell us in 1 Peter? As many as possible to be saved. Okay, guys? So he's not going to exclude you for something that you didn't have control over. All right. Let's look at, before we Yeah, that's good. 23 is good.
Yeah,
let's skip
let's
to
move
24
on to
real quick.
24.
And I'll just pick up right there and I'll read that. So in chapter 24, it says, verse 1, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house. She leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife. If the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and if the latter husband dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband, the first husband who sent her away, is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, since she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out with the army, nor be charged with any duty. He shall be free at home 1 year, and shall give happiness to his wife whom he has taken. No one shall take a handmill or an upper millstone in pledge, for he would be taking a life in pledge. If a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen of the sons of Israel, he deals with them violently or sells them, then that thief shall die. So you shall purge the evil from among you. Be careful against an infection of leprosy, that you diligently observe and do according to all that the Levitical priests teach you, as I have commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. When you make your neighbor a loan or any sort, you shall not enter his house to take his pledge. You shall remain outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. If he is a poor man, you shall not sleep with his pledge. When the sun goes down, you shall surely return the pledge to them, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you, and it will be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. You shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your countrymen or one of the aliens who is in the land in your towns. You shall give him his wages on the day before the sun sets, for he is poor and sets his heart on it, so that he will not cry out against you to the Lord. And it will become sin in you. Father shall not be put to death for their sons, nor shall sons be put to death for their fathers. Everyone shall be put to death for his own sin. You shall not pervert the justice, do an alien or an orphan, nor take a widow's garment in pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I am commanding you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in the field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. When you gather the grapes of the vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for the alien, the orphan, and for the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I am commanding you to do this thing. Okay, so wow, lots in that chapter.
Yes,
you know what immediately sticks out to me, which I think is fascinating. I think it's in verse 5 and 6. No, just 5. It talks about the guy, if they're going to battle and he just got married.
Yeah.
And it says that, he can't go for the first year. He can't go to the battlefield. He's got to go home, spend with his wife, and give his wife happiness.
Yeah.
God cares about a woman's happiness.
Yes, he does.
I have heard the most ludicrous things in my lifetime, some from leaders in churches, that the Bible is misogynistic or sexist in how it treats women. And in fact, it's completely the opposite in my opinion. God cares about a woman's happiness. Okay?
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say about that. We can talk about that more in depth. Which is why I've always said, sweetie, the more that I love God, the more that I walk in his commandments, the better I'm going to love you.
I would agree with that.
So this is for all the men out there, for all the women out there, pray for your husband to walk in the commandments.
Yeah.
He will better love you. For all men out there, do your best to walk in the commandments. You will better love your wife. Happy wife, happy life. And that's from the Father, right? I would say the Father should have made that bumper sticker. Happy wife, happy life.
Yes.
That's not a commandment, but it could be. Either way. All right. So, what did you want to talk about? The Joseph conundrum, the Joseph issue.
Well,
about the kidnapping and everything.
So when we were studying this, I noticed in verse 7, it says, if a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen of the sons of Israel, and he deals with him violently or sells him, then that thief shall die. So you shall purge the evil from among your brothers. So the question that it brought up for me was, what about the 10 brothers of Joseph who not only dealt with him violently and kidnapped him, but also sold him? Literally broke all three of those,
Right.
commandments in there. And we're going to talk about that later when we do our pairings. So stay tuned, because there is a reason that they weren't punished for what they did.
Right.
So more towards the end of our
Stay tuned.
of our talk, we'll get to that. So.
Yeah. And it's good because it actually it clears up two issues almost.
Yeah.
So it's good. Stay tuned, guys. Also, I think it's interesting that at the end of this chapter, it talks about, your practices for, cleaning the sheaves out of the field, right? When you do your harvest in the field, or you go to the olive tree and you get, your harvest from the olive tree. What else? It's about the vineyard, right? Also, if you're harvesting your vineyard. So in those three capacities, it says, once you go over it one time, don't go over it a second time.
Right.
Whatever's left after the first gleaning, leave it there for the alien, the widow, and the orphan. Right. So those three things are consistently put together, because this is a wonderful foreshadow of the kingdom, okay? Yep. Again, one of the reasons we're doing this kingdom portion is to show how the behavior of the New Jerusalem to come, that all the inhabitants, God's behavior, and all of us who will be resurrected into the New Jerusalem will be doing the behavior of Torah inside the city and for the survivors outside the city, those who had survived the incredible day of the Lord that's going to happen, the great and terrible day of the Lord. All right, so this idea is that they're going to need provisions. Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be a common practice, so that any stranger who comes to the corners, remember, talked about don't glean the corners, leave that for the alien, the widow. That's a different commandment, but it falls in line with the same one, right? And that's what it's talking about. Don't go over it again because you missed some on the outer rim or the corner or something. Leave it, because there's other people that's going to need it. You've already got your abundance. The Father's going to bless you as a result of that. And speaking of being blessed, I think it's interesting how the pledge, right? When the cloak that's used for a pledge. Yeah. I think it was like in verse 14 or whatever, that if you loan someone, you took a pledge in security for a loan, to give it back to him at the end of the day, because he needs it, right? And it says you'll be righteousness for you if you do that. So he's like encouraging, even when you're in a position of power of loaning money to somebody, and you take possession from that person you loan money to as security for the loan. In this particular case, right, it was encouraging an incredible amount of generosity and mercy from the person actually doing the loaning. And I just want to go ahead and copy paste this and email it to Chase Bank and Wells Fargo and Fannie and Freddie Mae. No,
and add the whole, canceling out all debts every 7 year while you're at it. It's interesting. Okay, guys. Do we want to go to 25? Yeah.
Do you want to read 25?
Chapter 25, yeah. And it's all of chapter 25. It's a pretty short chapter.
Yeah, and then we'll go on to our parents.
Okay. Chapter 25. If there is a dispute between men, and they go to court, and the judges decide their case, and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall then make him lie down and be beaten in his presence with the number of stripes according to his guilt. He may beat him 40 times, but no more, so that he does not beat him with many more stripes than these, and your brother is not degraded in your eyes. You shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, My husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall summon him and speak to him, and if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders, and pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face, and she shall declare, Thus it is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. In Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed. If two men, a man and his countrymen, are struggling together, and the wife of one comes near to deliver her husband from the hand of the one who is striking him, and puts out her hand and seizes his genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. You shall not show pity. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have a full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. For everyone who does these things, everyone who acts acts unjustly is an abomination to the Lord your God. Remember what Amalek did to you along the way when you came out from Egypt, how he met you along the way and attacked among you all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall come about, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You must not forget.
Okay. Yes. All right. Fun stuff in there.
Yeah.
What pops out to you?
Oh, well, there's a few things in there that, I might just not have any comment on, like, the whole taking the sandal off and sitting in the face thing. I'm sure there's some sort of rhyme to that reason, but
it seems to be an obscure
I don't know
rule.
Yeah, it seems kind of random.
I've always wondered, was there a fellow Israelite who maybe was like, joking, like kind of prodding at the guy who refused to help, he refused to comply in this situation, who now his house is called He Whose Sandal Was Removed, right? And so he, like, some fellow Israelite made him a family crest with just like a bare foot, or maybe 2 feet, and one of them's missing a sandal, and you got some ugly toenails on there.
Crest.
So I don't. It seems like a very unique rule, but I think it falls in line perfectly with the instruction right before it, where it talked about the two men fighting, and if one of the wives tries to get involved in the fight and reaches out to grab one of the genitals of one of the men fighting, which I'm guessing would be the man, not her husband, then she has to get her hand cut off for trying to do that, to interfere like that. It seems to be both of these rules, right, have to do with protecting future generations to be born, right? Which is essentially protecting the seed to come. Because what happens, babe, if the two guys fighting, what happens if one of them's from the line of Judah? And his testicles get crushed because they were grabbed in a fight by someone he wasn't fighting with, right? Or what happens if the wife who is a widow and the brother-in-law will not give her a child? What happens if she was the line of Judah, right? So we have all these implications for the Messiah to come, which I think is pretty interesting, because it seems to be these two specific laws are protecting the propagation of Israel, and to become as numerous, all right, as they were promised to be, and to be prospered, right? To prosper. Mm-hmm. So you're literally, as a man, I can appreciate that kind of protection, that kind of legal protection. And so now I think we're going to jump into our pairings.
Yeah.
So we got two pairings from the prophets, one in Isaiah, one in Ezekiel. Earlier we mentioned the eunuch.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to jump back to that idea, because remember, talking about the eunuch cannot come into the assembly, which we discussed as the tabernacle. And there was a reason for that. And let's see how God responds to the eunuch over time. So we're going to go first with Isaiah 56, then Ezekiel, then to Matthew, then to Revelation.
All right. So Isaiah chapter 56, and this is going to be verses 1 through 7. Thus says the Lord, preserve justice and do righteousness, for my salvation is about to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. How blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who takes hold of it, who keeps from profaning the Sabbath, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. For thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, and choose what pleases me, and hold fast my covenant, to them I will give in my house and within my walls a memorial, and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which will not be cut off. Also the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant, even those I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all the peoples.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? So beautiful.
It makes me tear up every time I read it.
Okay, so we have a spotlight, if you will.
Yep.
The Father's putting a spotlight on the eunuchs themselves.
And the foreigners.
And the foreigners, absolutely. And I think that's interesting. So we're building with something. Let's read also in Ezekiel 44, also to do with eunuchs.
All right, so this is going to be Ezekiel in chapter 44 and verses 6 through 9. You shall say to the rebellious ones, to the house of Israel, Thus says the Lord your God, Enough of all your abominations, O house of Israel, when you brought in foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary, to profane it, even my house, when you offered my food, the fat and the blood, for they made my covenant void, this in addition to all your abominations. And you have not kept charge of my holy things yourselves, but you have set foreigners to keep charge of my sanctuary. Thus says the Lord God, No foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, of all the foreigners who are among the sons of Israel, shall enter my sanctuary.
Well, there it is. So apparently at some point in the history, during the days of Ezekiel, or quite slightly before, the Levites were bringing in eunuchs, which... guys that were, not eunuchs, but guys that were uncircumcised in heart.
Yeah.
Right.
And notice it says uncircumcised in heart. It's so, this circumcision of the heart thing didn't just start in the New Testament. Circumcising your heart was supposed to start with you keeping the commandments. That's what it means to circumcise your heart to the Lord, is to walk in his commandments.
So I think that that's fascinating because he's telling them once we get into the kingdom, right, not only are people going to be circumcised at the resurrection, which means you have to have something to be circumcised.
Yeah.
So, the eunuchs will be quote unquote whole again, okay? Yeah. And they'll be circumcised at their resurrected body, and and our hearts will be circumcised, which is the great promise of the resurrection as well. Okay? But let's look over real quick at the Wisdom of Solomon. It's another little book from the Apocrypha, and in the Wisdom of Solomon it actually mentions this whole concept as well. This is going to be in chapter 3, verse 14. It says, And blessed is the eunuch, with which his hands has wrought no iniquity, nor imagined wicked things against God. For unto him shall be given the special gift of faith, and an inheritance in the temple of the Lord, more acceptable to his mind. All right, so I want us to focus on that term, he's given a special gift of faith, because we're about to read, Jesus mentioned eunuchs, and in our opinion, he's talking about this special gift of faith. Okay? So if we look over at Matthew 19, and in Matthew 19, Jesus says, I think this is going to be in verse 12, Jesus says, For there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men, and there are also eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Wow. So, and the end of the verse says, He who is able to accept this, let him accept it. Sweetie, I love God, and as I get better at walking the commandments, my love for him grows all the more, right? I feel confident to say in my life that I'm ready to lay down my life for my faith if I needed to. I don't know if I'm ready to make myself a eunuch. So nor would you be, but I think that it's crazy to me as a man, okay? And this is obviously we're talking about men here in this passage, that these guys, Jesus is specifically calling them out. Yeah. And he's given us the context that this is not a spiritual application. Okay, guys, he's given the context of some are born that way, some are made that way by men, and others may do that to themselves, specifically for the sake of the kingdom of God. Yeah. Okay? To me, that's the special gift of faith. To me, that's those who are, Isaiah 56 was talking about, they're given this amazing, once the resurrection happens and they get to the tabernacle of God, they're given a special gift, if you will, right? Yeah. A name better than just sons and daughters.
Well, and also, people might wonder what he means by made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. And then all you have to do to answer that question is remember something else that he said, which is, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Yeah. And a lot of us, talk about, oh, well, it's not literal, but I mean, it was literal for some people who were so dedicated to not ever falling into sin that they would go to this step of making themselves into a eunuch for the sake of entering the kingdom.
And for the sake of clarity for anyone watching, we're not saying you should do that.
Right.
That's between you and the Father. That's obviously, this is a very select group of people.
Yeah.
That's, you would need, that's not from us. You just take that and do with it what you want. But I think that what we've looked at is we've seen this idea in Deuteronomy talking about the eunuchs are excluded from the tabernacle. We understand the concept of the resurrection where everything's made whole again. And then everyone who is in the temple of God, according to Ezekiel 44, has a circumcised male member. Also, we look at Isaiah 56 where it mentions the eunuchs.
Yep.
So it's almost like God's saying, okay, I can't have eunuchs near me, but for those who have made themselves eunuchs, for my sake, for the kingdom, to be here in the kingdom, because it's a part of them trying to discipline themselves according to the rules of the kingdom, which is Torah. For those who've gone to that great step, I'm going to reward them extra. And that's why we have mentioned the wisdom of Solomon. I would suggest that the reward we're about to read is the reward of the eunuchs. Okay? So this is going to be in Revelation 14. And it's starting verse 1, and then we'll go through verse 5. It says, "And then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne, before the living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as firstfruits to God and to the Lamb." Okay, so that's why we've come to, after studying this, we've come to the decision, or the conclusion, I should say, from all the previous verses we gave you about the eunuchs and the treatment of them and how God views them and Jesus' mention of them. 144,000 over time, these are all the eunuchs. Okay?
Yeah.
Because there's no other mention of the 144,000. There's no symbology of here, because if this was symbolic language, not only Revelation, but some other prophet would also talk about and explain it, just like everything else in Revelation. So we're contending that it is explained. It is talked about.
Yeah.
In Isaiah, Wisdom of Solomon, Matthew 19:12. So from all those prophets, right? So that's where that's why they get to follow the Lamb where he goes. That's why it says that they've kept themselves chaste from women.
Yeah.
And they're purchased from among men just like everybody else. So don't get the idea that this is somehow some different resurrection or that they're already in heaven. No. This, because they're the whole term of purchasing, that could be a whole nother video, but we're all purchased from Sheol. We're all purchased through the blood of Christ, through his selfless sacrifice, as he became our high priest and bears our sins now to make immediate an atonement for us, to raise us up on the last day. In the relevance of that context, we're all purchased by Yeshua. Okay, this is what David talks about in the Psalms, how we are ransomed, our souls are ransomed. Okay, so anyway, I don't want people to get tripped up on that. So anyway, we think that's the 144,000.
Yeah. For me, all the other quote studies I've heard about the 144,000. It really is just analyzing that particular passage, and it isn't going back and finding other verses in the rest of the Bible that support the various theories for who people think this 144,000 are. But in this study, I mean, I would say we've got a lot of scriptural evidence from prior to the book of Revelation that would point out there's clearly something going on with the eunuchs throughout the Bible, and there's clearly, a special promise made to them, and even Jesus himself speaks of them specifically. That's so, right. This is the only study I've found, for lack of a better phrase, this is the only time I've ever, been involved in a discussion of the 144,000 that involved other verses from the rest of the Bible that back up the theory. So
in brief recap, an extreme example of obedience, an extreme reward. And I know this also rubs against those who don't understand the resurrection and how the righteous are rewarded at that time. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand why Jesus makes the statements of, well, you'll be recompensed according to your deeds. That our deeds do matter, because I know many of us have come out of mainstream church and a Christian mindset which tells us that our deeds don't matter and that we're all, that they're all washed in the blood of Christ. And guys, your deeds matter. Yeah. This is why James says, James 2:24, I'll let you read that on your own. Your deeds absolutely matter. It's how you show your faith. And the deeds are defined by us following Torah. Yeah. So here we have an extreme example of men who want to do the behavior of the kingdom for the sake of the kingdom to such an extreme. They take away the temptation, right? Yeah. And so this is where, and it even reminds me of Paul when he mentions a man, if a man can stay unmarried, good on him.
Yeah.
But for the men that burn, you better get married.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, they're addressing these real human issues, right?
Right.
There's real biology involved. These guys, they had an extreme act of obedience. They're getting an extreme reward.
And we also know that Jesus himself talked about the least and the greatest in the kingdom. So there's also this kind of, thought process that everybody will just be... I don't want to use the term equals. I don't want to use any of the term classes because I don't see it as a class system. But there's going to be least in the kingdom and there's going to be great in the kingdom. Right. And if you're rewarded according to your works, and someone like Isaiah or Jeremiah has a lot more works than me, he's going to be rewarded based on that. So.
Well, we see the same concept with angels, right? So we see that some angels are put in charge of large things.
Right.
Other angels are just ancillary. There's secondary. There's absolutely rank.
Yeah, I guess rank would be the right word, not class.
There's an actual, council of angels that the Father talks to at different times, and that's a different video, I guess.
Yeah.
But this is an example from Scripture when Jesus talks about the greatest and the least in the kingdom. This isn't a new idea.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, our last pairing we're going to do is from the Book of Jubilees. It's one of my favorite books, right? As far as extra biblical books or apocryphal books. And I hate to even use that word because it's still in some Bibles. It's just been taken out of the modern American Bible. So I think that it's an amazing chapter. We're going to go over chapter 33. Mm-hmm. It talks about, this is the story of Reuben and Bilhah, and how an angel is describing, okay, real quick, for those, if you haven't seen any other episodes, Jubilees is from the narrative of angels talking to Moses on Mount Sinai, explaining to Moses all the laws of the Torah that they're giving him. And as they're explaining to him, this is just chapter 1 of Jubilees, right? This is how it starts out. So you remember, Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and then went back up for another 40 days. He's up there for a long time. And Galatians 3, Hebrews chapter 2 tells us that the law was mediated to Moses on Mount Sinai by angels. Right. That means they're the ones who physically spoke it to them, to Moses, to write down and to remember and instruct everybody else. So this is the setting and the narration of the Book of Jubilees. And in this particular chapter, the angels are explaining to Moses and telling him to remember this law. Here's the law for this, and this is the backstory to the law. And this is why I'm just now giving you this law, and it wasn't given earlier. So it's pretty fascinating, because remember, we're tying this to what we read in chapter 24, where it talked about if any of you countrymen kidnaps another member of Israel, treats him harshly, sells him, or whatever, then the kidnapper is to be put to death.
Right.
Okay? So just keep that in mind as we read this. Okay?
All right. And we'll put links in the description, guys, to where you can get to the Book of Jubilees and the Wisdom of Solomon, and all these other great extra biblical texts, because they're available in various places online. And you can, obviously they're the Sefer and things you can buy to own them in person. Okay, so Jubilees chapter 33, and this is going to be verses 1 through 18. And Jacob went and dwelt in the south of do you want to say that for me?
I think it's Magdala-Dref.
Magdala-Dref.
Yeah.
Okay. Jacob went and dwelt south of this place, and he went to his father Isaac, and he and Leah his wife, on the new moon of the 10th month. And Reuben saw Bilhah, Rachel's maid, the concubine of his father, bathing in water in a secret place, and he loved her. And he hid himself at night, and he entered the house of Bilhah, and he found her sleeping alone on a bed in her house. And he lay with her, and she awoke and saw, and behold, Reuben was lying with her in the bed. And she uncovered the border of her covering, and seized him, and cried out, and discovered that it was Reuben. And she was ashamed because of him, and released her hand from him, and he fled. And she lamented because of this thing exceedingly, and did not tell it to anyone. And when Jacob returned and sought her, she said unto him, I am not clean for thee, for I have been defiled as regards thee. For Reuben has defiled me, and has lain with me in the night, and I was asleep, and did not discover until he uncovered my skirt, and slept with me. And Jacob was exceedingly wroth with Reuben, because he had lain with Bilhah, because he had uncovered his father's skirt. And Jacob did not approach her again, because Reuben had defiled her. And as for any man who uncovers his father's skirt, his deed is wicked exceedingly, for he is abominable before the Lord. For this reason it is written and ordained on the heavenly tablets that a man should not lie with his father's wife, and should not uncover his father's skirt, for this is unclean. They shall surely die together. the man who lies with his father's wife, and the woman also, for they have wrought uncleanness on the earth. And there shall be nothing unclean before our God in the nation which he has chosen for himself as a possession. And again it is written a second time, Cursed be he who lieth with the wife of his father, for he hath uncovered his father's shame. And all the holy ones of the Lord said, So be it, so be it. And do thou, Moses, command the children of Israel that they observe this word, for it entails a punishment of death, and it is unclean, and there is no atonement forever to atone for the man who has committed this, but he is to be put to death and slain, and stoned with stones, and rooted out from the midst of the people of our God. For to no man who does so in Israel is it permitted to remain alive a single day on the earth, for he is abominable and unclean. And let them not say, To Reuben was granted life and forgiveness after he had lain with his father's concubine, and to her also, though she had a husband, and her husband Jacob his father was still alive. For until that time there had not been revealed the ordinance and judgment and law in its completeness for all, but in thy days it has been revealed, as a law of seasons and of days, and an everlasting law for the everlasting generations. And for this law there is no consummation of days, and no atonement for it, but they must both be rooted out in the midst of the nation. On the day whereon they committed it, they shall slay them. And do thou, Moses, write it down for Israel, that they may observe it and do according to these words, and not commit a sin unto death, for the Lord our God is judge, who respects not persons and accepts not gifts.
Wow. All right, guys. So Jubilees is so much fun because it gives just blatant clarity.
Yeah,
right?
so much context.
And it explains itself.
Yeah.
Because it's trying to say, this is why I'm telling you to write this law down today. This is why you never heard of it before.
Yeah.
Right? Because before you, Moses, and before this moment at Mount Sinai, even though the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, going all the way back to Adam, they still followed Torah. They didn't have all the intricacies. They didn't have all the specific details because of not only was the Levitical priesthood not fully set up, there was no tabernacle, and all the rules that go along with that, but even little bitty rules of interaction. And it seems to be, tell me if you think I'm wrong here, it seems to be that the father withheld this rule to save Reuben.
Yeah.
Right? Because had Abraham and Jacob and Isaac already known about this law, they would have been required to kill Reuben and Bilhah.
Both of them, yeah.
Right. And I don't remember who Benjamin was born of. Was he born of Bilhah?
I think Benjamin was born of Rachel.
Wasn't either way. But I mean, we don't want anything bad happening to either one of them, but specifically Reuben, right? Because he's one of the 12. Mm-hmm. He's one of the 12 sons of Israel.
Yeah.
So just like with Joseph, and we have this story that we have the commandment in Deuteronomy 24 where it says, if anyone kidnaps his brother and sells him and treats him harshly, the kidnappers die.
Yeah.
So if that law, which is also a specific detail, had been given in fullness during the days of Joseph, then that means Jacob has a problem. Because now, once it's discovered years later that what they did to Joseph, then we have an issue here, right? Where the law would have commanded the brothers of Joseph, minus Benjamin, he wasn't born yet, but the other 10 would have all been killed.
Yeah, and we don't see God punishing them for this either, because it could easily be argued that, nobody found out until all this time later, and Joseph was forgiving and all that. But we see other examples of, I think it was it Judah's sons? There was a succession of Judah's sons that were described as not pleasing to the Lord, and the Lord killed them. Well,
because of the rule we read in Deuteronomy 24 where they weren't taking over this role of helping the sister-in-law procreate.
So my point is just that it's not just that nobody found out about that, so they couldn't be punished for it, but God himself didn't punish them for that. And it would appear, with this background context given from Jubilees, that this might be a detail in the law that had not been revealed in its fullness to Israel and his sons just yet.
That's right. God using his own legal loophole for accountability. To protect, knowing that man's frail, knowing that he can see the future, and he can see Reuben's going to make this mistake. He can see that Judah's going to go try to hook up with Tamar. Yeah. He can see, not knowing that Judah's going to go try to find a prostitute, and inconsequentially, unknowingly, that be Tamar. And also, he's going to see ahead and see the 10 brothers sell Joseph into slavery. This could be huge reasons why we get the fullness of all the details of the law at Mount Sinai. But we get these mentions of the patriarchs beforehand, still following Torah, still doing priests, sacrifices, and altars, but they don't seem to be talking about the fullness of the Torah like we see happened with the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. So as far as theological continuity along the timeline, guys, this could be huge.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like the Father using his own legal loopholes, knowing if I tell them, then they're going to be responsible. So I'm going to hold back on this little specific detail. I know they're going to make a couple mistakes, but I need them to be alive.
Yeah.
I need the 12 sons to be alive and their descendancies to start. And then later on, once we're to a bigger, then I'll give them the fullness of the law. Then they will be accountable for all of it. But at the same time, I'm sorry to interrupt you. At the same time, I'm going to give them in a all-encompassing priesthood with rules and regulations that can atone and account for everybody. Yes, I know this one says there's no atonement for this one, but I'm just saying, all these other intricacies of the law that we get at Mount Sinai, we also get the fullness of the priesthood as well that atones for man on the earth. So I think that that's really important because he's like balancing out the law with forgiveness.
Right.
Okay, so just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I was just going to say that apparently at one point in time, ignorance of the law was an excuse. It is not an excuse now because it's all been revealed in its fullness now. But apparently, at a certain point in time, I mean, it does make sense on a legal level and a level of justice that if the Father had not revealed these parts of the law to them, then how could he hold them accountable?
Well, even within the law given at Sinai, it talks about, I think it's chapter 4 of Leviticus, where the priests do they do sacrifices for sins of omission.
Right. Unintentional
unknown sins. You didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Nobody knew about it. There's even some for the individual and then some for the entire congregation. If they've all sinned, then they realize they're doing it bad later. So there's mercy within the law. Right?
Yeah, so if you ever go out to a restaurant and you eat something and you find out later there was pork in it, don't freak out.
Right.
We have a high priest and we are covered in the law for unintentional sins and things that we don't necessarily have control over, but are still considered transgressing his commandments.
I was eating Lucky Charms when I met her. And she's looking at me like, don't those have gelatin in those marshmallows? And I was like, oh, my Lucky Charms, my Lucky Charms.
It was a sad day for Sean when he found out he couldn't eat his Lucky Charms.
So anyway, no more Lucky Charms.
Probably good for me, though, because you'll probably live a bit longer without all that junk.
Okay, so I think that this is the end of our Kingdom Portions. Appreciate everyone here. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below in the video. As always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. If you like the video, how you bless others with it is by hitting the like button, because then it puts it in the YouTube algorithms so other people can see it and they'll also be blessed by it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Just tap that like and hit the bell if you want to see future videos announced to you. But other than that, baby, I had a great study. I think this was a lot of fun. I'm sure we may run into some fun questions about some of the things we mentioned.
I hope so. It means people were actually watching and paying attention.
Right. So, guys, we're open to it. And is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
So I just wanted to remind everybody that on our channel we have a little saying, and that saying is context creates comprehension. And I just want to encourage everybody that the Bible can be understood, it can be understood in its fullness, and you can effectively and easily preach the gospel of the kingdom of God to believer and unbeliever alike. And the way that you go about doing that is keeping everything in context. So I just want you to really be encouraged that when you understand some of these core concepts and you keep them all in their proper context, it's really easy to read the book and to explain it and teach it to others and to answer questions and objections, which is important for sharpening our minds and our faith. So I just want to thank you guys, and we hope to see you next week.
Yes, thanks. Join us next week, and for this one, we'll see you later. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, guys. Have a good